ईशा शारिपुत्र रूपं शून्यत्त शून्यत्तैव रूपं रूपं न प्रतीक् शून्यत्त शून्यत्तय न प्रतीक् रूपं यद्रूपं स शून्यत्तया शून्यत्त तद्रूपम् एवमेव वेदना संज्ञा संस्काराभिज्ञानम् ईशा शारिपुत्र सर्वधर्मः शून्यत्त लक्षणानुत्पन्ना अनिरुद्ध अमला विमला अनुनपार्णपूर्णः तस्मच्छारिपुत्र शून्यत्तयं न रूपं न वेदना न संज्ञा न संस्कार न विज्ञानं न कशुस्क्रोधग्राधा जीवकायमंसनि न रूपशब्दग्राधारसस्पृष्टव्यधर्मः न कक्षुदतुर्यवना मनोविज्ञदतु न अविद्या न अविद्यासयो यवनजरमारणं न जरमारणक्षयो न दुःखसमुदय निरोधमार्गः न ज्ञानं न प्राप्तिः न अप्राप्तिः तं तस्मच्छारिपुत्र तृतीयत्वात् बोधिसत्त्वस्य प्राज्ञापारमितमश्रित्य विहरति चित्तवर्णः चित्तवर्णः नसित्वरत्रस्तो विपर्यस्तिक्रान्तो निस्तनवानः प्राप्तः त्वद्भाव्यावसिद्धः सर्वभूतः प्राज्ञापारमितमश्रित्य अनुतरम् सम्यक् सम्बोधिम् अभिसम्बूधः तस्मच्यप्तव्यं प्राज्ञापारमितः महामन्त्रोस् महाविद्यामन्त्रोस् नूतनमन्त्रोस् समसममन्त्रः सर्वदुःखप्रशमनः सत्यम् अमितत्वत् प्राज्ञापारमितम् उक्तो मन्त्रः तद्यदा गते गते पारसंगते बुद्धि स्वाहा तद्यदा गते गते पारसंगते बुद्धि स्वाहा तद्यदा गते गते पारसंगते बुद्धि स्वाहा इति प्राज्ञापारमितं हृदयं समाप्तम् ॐ नमो भगवत्यै प्रियप्रज्ञापारमित्यै रियावलोकितेश्वर बोधिसत्त्वो गम्भीरं प्राज्ञापारमितं चार्यं चरमन्नो व्यावलोक्यति स्म पञ्चस्कन्धः तं स्वभावशून्यं पश्यति स्म ईशा शारिपुत्र रूपं शून्यत्त शून्यत्तैव रूपं रूपं न प्रतीक् शून्यत्त शून्यत्तय न प्रतीक् रूपं यद्रूपं स शून्यत्तया शून्यत्त तद्रूपम् एवमेव वेदना संज्ञा संस्काराभिज्ञानम् ईशा शारिपुत्र सर्वधर्मः शून्यत्त लक्षणानुत्पन्ना अनिरुद्ध अमला विमला अनुनपार्णपूर्णः तस्मच्छारिपुत्र शून्यत्तयं न रूपं न वेदना न संज्ञा न संस्कार न विज्ञानं न कशुस्क्रोधग्राधा जीवकायमंसनि न रूपशब्दग्राधारसस्पृष्टव्यधर्मः न कक्षुदतुर्यवना मनोविज्ञदतु न अविद्या न अविद्यासयो यवनजरमारणं न जरमारणक्षयो न दुःखसमुदय निरोधमार्गः न ज्ञानं न प्राप्तिः न अप्राप्तिः तं तस्मच्छारिपुत्र तृतीयत्वात् बोधिसत्त्वस्य प्राज्ञापारमितमश्रित्य विहरति चित्तवर्णः नसित्वरत्रस्तो विपर्यस्तिक्रान्तो निस्तनवानः प्राप्तः त्वद्भाव्यावसिद्धः सर्वभूतः प्राज्ञापारमितमश्रित्य अनुतरम् सम्यक् सम्बोधिम् अभिसम्बूधः तस्मच्यप्तव्यं प्राज्ञापारमितः महामन्त्रोस् महाविद्यामन्त्रोस् नूतनमन्त्रोस् समसममन्त्रः सर्वदुःखप्रशमनः सत्यम् अमितत्वत् प्राज्ञापारमितम् उक्तो मन्त्रः तद्यदा गते पारसंगते बुद्धि स्वाहा Tajada gate gate parasam gate bodhi swaha. Tajata gate gate parasam gate bodhi swaha. Iti prajna paramitam hridayam samaptam. Om Namo Bhagavatai Riya Prajna Paramitai Riya Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Gambiram Prajna Paramitam Charyam Charamano Vyavlokyati Sma Panchaskandaha Tamsal Svabhava Shunyan Pasyati Sma Isha Shariputra Rupam Shunyata Shunyataiva Rupam Rupanna pratik shunyata shunyataya na pratik rupam yadrupam ta shunyataya shunyata tadrupam evameva vedana samya samskara vigyanam isha shariputra sarvadharmaha shunyata laksana nupana aniruddha amala vimala anunapalna purnaha tasmat shariputra shunyatayam na rupam na vedana na samgya na samskara na vigyanam na katsu skroda gratha jivataya mansani na ruva sabda gratha rasa sprastavya dharmaha na katsu datu yavana mano vigya datu na avidya sayo yavana jara maranam na jara maranak sayo na dukkha samudya nirodha margaha na janam na praptihi na apraptahi tam tasmat shariputra tratitvat bodhisattvasya prajnaparamitam akritya viharatya chittivarnaha natitvara trasto viparyasti kranto nistanavanaha praptaha svadvavyavyasidhaha sarvabhudaha prajnaparamitam akritya anutaram Samyak sambodhim abhisambhudaha tasmat yaktavyam prajnaparamita mahamantros mahavidya mantros nutara mantros samasama mantraha sarvaduka prasmanaha satyam amitatvat prajnaparamita mukto mantraha tajada gate gate parasam gate bodhi Yada gate gate parasam gate bodhi swaha. Yada gate gate parasam gate bodhi swaha. Iti prajna paramitam hridayam samaptam.
Tumba Jumden de Shen Shewa Ta Jumba Yang Dangwa Zobe Sanje Rikwa Dan Shabzu Demba Dewara Shewa Jigden Jeba Jebu Dube Kalo Yorwa Lana Meba Lada Menamje Tumba Sanje Jumden de Pejawa Jaja Duvala Jatelo Chodo Jazo Che Ho Tumba Chumden de Shen Shewa Tajumba Yandawa Zobe Sanje Rigwa Dan Shasu Demba Dewara Sheba Jigden Jemba Jebo Debe Kalu Jurwa Lana Meba Lada Menamje Tumba Sanje Chumden de Pejawa Jaja Duvala Shazel Chodo Yazo Che Ho Dumba Chumden de Shen Sheba Tajumba Yandaba Zobe Sanje Rigba Dan Shabzo Demba Dewara Sheba Jigden Chemba Jebu Dube Kalo Gyurwa Lana Meba Lada Menamje Dumba Sanje Chumden de Bejawa Shaja Duba La Shazel Chodo Yazo Che Ho Sanje Chodan Soje Chonam Ala Chanchu Bado Tane Yazo Che Tage chushe jebe sonama je dola penje sanje dobara sho sanje chodan soje chonama la chanju bado tane gyawso je Dagi chushe jebe sonama je dola penje sanje dobara sho sanje chodan soje chonama la Chanju bado dane gyabso che tage chushe jebe sonama je dola penje sanje dobara sho. Oh, good morning. So before we dive into the text, I would like to mention some things that I forgot to mention the last time. So the first thing is that the chanting that you heard, the Heart Sutra chanting in Sanskrit, that was chanted by none other than our Brian, Kachuling's Brian Greer. When I first got that, I thought that it was chanted or recited by an Indian, but it turned out to be our Brian. Very impressive. And also I want to mention that Brian has been working really hard to edit all the videos and then upload onto YouTube, as well as upload on Kajuling's Facebook. And I was told that it takes hours, especially uploading onto Facebook. If it is a big file, it takes hours to finish uploading. But he has worked so hard for the past 2 years. Those that you can see. Of course, now that we are doing live streaming, so it is there. But earlier days, he has to first record my talk during the class, and then later go home and do the editing work, and then upload onto YouTube as well as on the Facebook. So I would like to acknowledge Brian's effort here and would like to thank him for his continuous support to Kachuling. And then I also want to make some clarifications from the last class. I realized that I think most of you must have noticed that there are things that does not really match what I thought I was saying and what I was actually coming out of my mouth. So there was what you call the synchronization between my thought and my speech, gone kaput. So there was one time I was talking about the Kunshi Namshe repository, what was that? Now I forget. Repository consciousness, where we store all the karmic imprints. That type of consciousness sometimes is known as the eight consciousness. It is the idea proposed by Chittamatra school. It's not the Madhyamika. And I realize in that I keep saying that Madhyamika, so that is not the case. So Before we dive, I would like to just read this. Is by Ayadeva. Sonam chungwe chön di la tezum sawa yang minjur. Tezum soba zamji yang siva shubu cheba jurs. So those people like us who has not much merit, for us, we won't be able to even, let's put it this way, even a doubt on the topic of emptiness would arise for people, those who lack merit. And even if anybody, even a doubt whether there is such thing as emptiness or not, what is this emptiness? Just a doubt, arising a doubt, just having a doubt itself is as a, it can that means it can actually liberate us from the samsara. It can end the samsaric cycle. So this highlights the importance of contemplating on the topic of emptiness, not to mention doing the real meditation on emptiness. So we are lucky, we are fortunate to be contemplating or discussing on this emptiness topic. So we are not just doubting, we are really trying to understand. So that is something worthwhile endeavor. And of course, if we are able to do that with bodhicitta motivation, then it becomes even better. So before we start the class, just for 1 minute, try to generate a good motivation, bodhicitta mind, and then with that kind of motivation, tell yourself that I am going to listen to this teaching, and then I'm going to apply these teachings as much as I can, so that I can benefit other sentient beings, so that I can achieve enlightenment for the sake of other sentient beings. Let's do that for 1 minute. Okay, thank you. So let's just continue from where we left. So I think we were here. So remember, we talked about the importance of dependent arising, understanding dependent arising, how critical it is to understand or to negate the existence of independent identity or autonomous identity. So just to recap what we have discussed in our last session was that all the schools, let's say like Mahayana schools, Chittamatra, and then in Mahayana we have two, the Sautantrika Madhyamika and Prasankika Madhyamika. All of these schools talk about lack of inherent existence. However, how they defined inherent existence is completely different. For Chittamatra, the inherent existence is mainly applies to external things, the forms, matters, physical things. Nothing exists from external things. It is all give rise to as a result of ripening the imprints that we have deposited in the past. So that is just a projection of our imprints. Nothing really exists externally. So that's their understanding. And then for when the Sautantrika Madhyamika, when they say things do not exist inherently, so for them, in order for things to exist, so two things needs to come together. First of all, things must exist from its own, and then they need to have kind of a mental imputation. So this combination is how things come to being. So when we perceive things, to us, we don't see that combination. To us, it appears that there is nothing to do with our mental imputation. So that kind of existence is what they are refuting. So now when it comes to the Prasankika Madhyamika, to them, when they say that there is no inherent existence, so they are saying that there is, how to put it? There is no independence. Things do not exist from its own. So there are these various differences. So we need to, anyway, we are going to focus on the Prasankika's view. So here when we talk about emptiness, we are talking about non-existence of things existing independently, not relying or not depending on other factors, causes and conditions, parts. So all the schools, those who say that things do exist from its own or exist from its side, the reason they quote is that things are dependent arising. Because of that, they say things do exist from its own. But for Madhyamika, Prasankika Madhyamika, they also say the same thing. The reason is same thing. Things do not exist from its own because they are dependently arisen. Things depend on things. So here the main point is that to Prasankika Madhyamika, if things exist from its own, then they are independent. Then they do not require causes and conditions. They do not require to depend on other things for the things to come about. So because of that, the dependent arising, the reasoning of being dependent arising applies. So there are various categories or types of dependent arising. So first we look here, dependence on causes and condition. So this is the easiest way. All the schools, even non-Buddhists, they talk about dependent on causes and conditions. Ordinary people understand this. If it is a result, it must have a cause. So results come into being because of their causes. So this is dependent on causes and conditions. So results, anything that depends, like our aggregates, depends on all kinds of causes and conditions. And then there is another type of dependent origination, which is dependent on parts. So like in the image, look at this car. So car come into existence because of coming together of all these parts. So car, even though when we talk about car, when we think about car, to us it appears something solid there. But actually, car comes into being because of depending on its parts. So that's what is called the dependent on parts. Like us, we are made out of all the various parts. Our aggregates, firstly, our physical part and the mental part. And then if you break that further, then your flesh, your skin, your blood, your bones, all these made up who we are, what we call me or I. So that's dependent on parts. And then there's something called interdependence. So you look at the image here. There is this two A's, different sides. So we say this is small, this is big. This small is small in relation to the big one. Tall, short, big, small, far, near. All these are in relation to other things. So if there is no other short pieces, then we cannot say that this is short or this is tall, this is big or this is small. So this is what is called the interdependent. Their being short and tall is dependent on each other. And finally, we have something called dependent on labels or designations. So this is, I think we can use this example, A. So A exists because of our giving this label, this mental imputation. So if A exists from its own and it does not depend on this mental imputation, then anybody who sees this image should know it as A. But if I show this to my mother, she would simply see it as some design there. She wouldn't see it as A. Whereas when we look at it, because we already know this kind of design is A, so our mental imputes that, our mind imputes that. So without that, if we take out that mental imputation, then A won't exist to us. Those who know it as A, it won't exist. So that's what it means by dependent on labels or designations or mental imputation. So all this actually sums up. All this, after having this understanding, we can kind of infer why the Prasankika Madhyamika say that if things are dependently arisen, then they are not inherently existence. Because when your identity is completely dependent on something else, that automatically negates the independent identity. that negates the existence of from its own. So that's the main point here. So we have already discussed on this the last session. So let's try to dive into the actual one. So anyway, His Holiness emphasizes this. We must be very clear that only the self that is being grasped as intrinsically real need to be negated. The self as a conventional phenomena is not rejected. So that's falling into one of the two extremes. So that's why, as I mentioned earlier, that for other schools, they cannot understand that for them, if things do not exist from its own, then things do not exist at all. Whereas the Prasangika Madhyamika, if things do exist from its own, then nothing exists. Remember, we talked about how karma and all this will be will no longer be feasible, because karma is actually the causes and conditions, causes and effect. So if things do not rely on the causes, things just appears without any causes or conditions, then yeah, there's no way that we can talk about karma, the concept of karma. And of course, because of that, we cannot talk about enlightenment and anything. Either everybody will become enlightenment like that, or nobody will become enlightened. So that's the point. So now, and also, if you did not notice that a rough note has been uploaded on the website. So those who have the notes with you, so now let's dive into the actual text. So if we divide the text, so it comes under three main headings: introduction, three main headings: introduction, the main body, and the conclusion. So the introduction, under the rubric of introduction, so first we have this, the title of the text, and then homage by the translator, and then the context or the background. So let's go one by one. So first the text, the title of the text. So title of the text, actually it's there is an arya, is in Sanskrit. So in most of the Tibetan, not say most, all the sutras that were translated into Tibetans, we always maintain this Sanskrit heading. So all sutras begins with the Sanskrit, the title in Sanskrit. So there is a reason for that, because Buddha Dharma, the main source of Buddha Dharma, is from India. So this is to signify, this is to show that this is an authentic text or authentic sutra, because the origin is from India, to signify that, to represent that the origin is from India. So this is that the Sanskrit, the title in Sanskrit is purposely maintained. So in Sanskrit, this text, this sutra is called Bhagavate Prajna Paramita Hrindaya, so which translates into the essence of the Sacred Mother, the perfection of wisdom. So Bhagavate, I'm not sure whether I am pronouncing correctly. So Bhagavate in Tibetan we call Chomden Dhamma, Chomden. So Chomden, there are 2 syllables. So normally Chomden De is the name given to Buddhas. So Chomden, Chom is literally means destroy. So the one who destroyed all the defilements, all the obscurations, all the faults. Den means one who possesses all the qualities, all the perfections. So that's the literal meaning of the word Chomden Dhamma. So here we use the Dhamma. As we discussed in last class, that Pranjaparamita, the perfection of wisdom, Shariputra, it can mean many things. So of course the main perfection of wisdom is the Buddha's wisdom, which is a perfected wisdom, nothing more to be perfected. So that is the Buddha's wisdom. But it is also given to the paths. The paths realize, the wisdom realizing emptiness. So here, because wisdom realizing emptiness give rise to enlightened being or Buddha, it is tantamount to mother. So Ma is mother. So as mothers bear child, likewise Pranjaparamita, the wisdom realizing emptiness, bears Buddhas. So that's why it's called Chomden Dhamma. Then Pranjaparamita, we already talked about the perfection of wisdom. And then Hrindaya is the essence. We also talk about that. So, and also I wanted to correct one thing. Remember last session I was wondering how many volumes of Kanjur, of sutras in Tibetan language. So there were 100 volumes already translated, 100 volumes of sutras translated into Tibetan. So Buddha has taught that many, of course more than that. So this is the essence. So the essence of all the teachings given by Buddha. So this is what it means, the Hrindaya. The essence of the Sacred Mother, the perfection of wisdom. And then it is followed by this homage by translator. This is another tradition. So when the translators, when they translate any sutras, they always make this homage, mainly for the purpose of successful translation. But it has become a tradition to classify what that sutra is about. So we talk about 3 baskets, 3 pratikas, is it? We talk about 3 baskets of teachings. So there are teachings mainly focused on ethics. There are teachings mainly focused on wisdom. There are teachings mainly focused on concentration. So in order to classify or identify which what this sutra belongs into which of the baskets, the translators purposely make this specific homage to specific objects. So if it is Vinaya, the ethics, if it's Vinaya, if the main content is about Vinaya, then usually the homage is made to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. I think so. Let me just confirm here. So here, in His Holiness book, If the text belonged to Abhidhamma collection, the subtle teachings of the Buddhists, then the homage was paid to Manjushri. So if it is the content is the concentration, it is mainly on the concentration part, Abhidhamma. Then, yeah, homage is made to Manjushri. Whereas, if the text belonged to Vinaya, the homage was paid to the omniscient mind of Buddha. So, sorry, I was mistaken. So, Tamje Kembala Chaselos. So, it is made to the omniscient mind. If the text belonged to the Sutra collection, homage was paid to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So here it says, my slide, I forgot to make the changes. Actually, the actual homage is made to the Sacred Mother, the perfection of wisdom. So in one of the commentaries, it says that this text belongs to the Sutra basket. So that's the purpose of making the homage. And now when we go to the context, so there are two different contexts: the common context, common context, and uncommon context is the background. So common context is because it is common because all sutras begins with this kind of background, explaining where this happened, when this happened, what was going on. It is kind of laying the scene for us. So this happens in all the sutras. So before sutra begins, if you are familiar with reading sutras, you will see that all sutras begin with this, that thus, what is called that, thus have I once heard. Of course, it will be different audience and then different topic, and sometimes it's just Buddha directly speaking, and in this case it's different. So that's the common. And then we have uncommon context, which is the specific context for this particular sutra. So let's go through this. So I am using the version in His Holiness book. So I see other versions. So I don't know which version you use, but anyway, I think it's more or less same. So it says, thus have I once heard. So here we talk about the perfect conditions, the four perfect conditions. So the first is perfect time. So when we say, suppose, okay, I think I need to explain this. So what happened was, these are all compiled after Buddha passed away. So when Buddha passed away, they had 3 rounds of compiling sessions, where mostly Ananda compiled the sutras, the texts that are on Sutrayana. So here there is some debate whether Ananda is the actual compiler, or whether it is Vajrapani or Manjushri. So anyway, the majority subscribes to Ananda being the compiler. So we will just follow the majority's view. So this is what Ananda is saying, that thus have I once heard. So this is called the perfect time. So when Ananda says, I once heard, there are different meanings. One connotation or one understanding is that this is so rare. I've only heard one time. That means this was not taught frequently. Only one time Buddha taught. So this shows the rarity of the teaching. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it, thus I once heard, it actually shows the, what you call the memory power of Ananda himself. He only heard once, but he has memorized, he has put into his memory, and he is able to recite it. So there are two ways to look at this. Thus have I once heard. Then the Bhagavan was saying, so this is the perfect teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. So the Bhagavan we have already described, or we have already talked about what it means, the Bhagavan. So Shakyamuni Buddha was staying in Rajgriha at Vulture's Peak. So now comes the perfect location. So one time, this happens one time when Buddha was staying in this particular place, particular location, which is Rajgriha at Vulture Peak. So there is a story why it is called Rajgriha. So I think it's okay, it's not so important. So Vulture Peak. Those who have been to this Vulture Peak, this is the one in the picture you see. If you go up there, it is just a small hilltop there. You have to climb all the way up there, and there is just a small area there. So it is called Vulture Peak. So why it is called Vulture Peak? There are different views. One view is that that hill itself looks like the vulture, looks like the shape of a vulture. So that's why it is named Vulture Peak. And then another version is that when you look from a distance, that peak looks like there is what you call the flock of vultures there, as if there is a gathering of vultures. And then another explanation is that the hill itself has the shape of a vulture's head, just the head. So these are the reasons given why it is called Vulture's Peak. At Vulture Peak, along with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. So this is what is called the perfect congregation, the audience who are present at that time when Buddha taught this. So it seems that there is this big community, great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. So monks, so there are devas, there are humans and non-humans. So the community of monks, of course we call it Sangha. So Sanghas are those who are ordained, the ordained monks. Because they are ordained, they kind of in a hierarchy, they rank higher. So that's why they are mentioned first. And then we have the congregation of bodhisattvas. So bodhisattvas, it can be lay person, it can be a deva's form, or it can be monks. But here, mainly lay community of bodhisattvas. And so that's the common context. So this this kind of context or the background you will see in all the sutras. And then for this particular sutra, it has its own context, its own background. So how this teaching came about. So this is called the uncommon context. So how it happened was Buddha entered into meditative absorption. So of course Buddha is an enlightened being. So for Buddha, technically speaking, there is no such time as now in meditative state and now out of meditative state. Buddha is all the time in meditative state. But during Buddha's time, what happens is, so after Buddha has meals, so sometimes Buddha will just continue meditating, and sometimes Buddha will then teach. You won't go into kind of meditative, but of course, as I mentioned, Buddha is all the time in meditative absorption. But in appearance, it appears as Buddha is not in meditative state. So what happens in those days when Buddha is not in meditative states, then they can ask, the disciples can ask questions and Buddha will answer. So when Buddha is in meditative states, of course, then the students cannot ask any questions. So Buddha entered into meditative absorption. So Buddha is now in this, at this time, Buddha entered into meditative state. And then Avalokiteshvara, Chenresi, so Avalokiteshvara was also entered, also in meditative state, went into meditation. And then it talks about how this dialogue come about. So the Blessed One entered the meditative absorption on the varieties of phenomena called the appearance of profound. So Samo, profound, we call it profound. So basically what it is saying is, so there are so many concentrations, so many types of concentration. So Buddha went into one of the concentration known as the profound, the appearance of the profound. So profound is normally, this term profound, the term profound is given to emptiness. Basically, Buddha went into the meditation of emptiness. At that time as well, the noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being. So Bodhisattva, of course you all know Bodhisattva, what Bodhisattva means. So we have, in Tibetan we have Chanju Sempa. Changchup, this is similar, Changchup. So Changchup is another term for Buddhahood, for enlightenment, but it has its own literal meaning. Chang is to purify or to cleanse all negativities. Chup is to perfect or to possess or to achieve all the qualities. So that is actually the Buddhahood. Sempa means so that in English is called body mind. So one who wishes to achieve that kind of mind. But we have this pa. The way we write pa is the taupa pa. So which is different from just pa. So pa is like heroic. So Bodhisattvas are unlike ordinary people. They have this, what you call this perseverance, this what is the word now? This courage to put up with any hardship. Remember in Lama Choba, Simje Re Re Chiyan Narmebe Menan Keva Kyazu Negwe Ningji Megyo Chanju Chozunbe Junju Parjin Zokor Chinji Lobs. So Bodhisattvas, even if they have to spend eons of years in hell realm just to help one sentient being, they are prepared to do. So that kind of courage they possess. So that's why they're called Sempa. So that's one way of explaining. Another way of explaining, Chanju Semba, Semba Chambo. So we have here Bodhisattva. Where is it now? Bodhisattva, the great being, Semba Chambo. So great being. So great being. So there are different, what do you call that? Bodhisattva's practice is unique in many ways. First of all, Bodhisattva aims to achieve enlightenment, which is going to take a long time, not just aiming to achieve liberation, which can be achieved faster or easier compared to Buddhahood. But their goal is to achieve enlightenment. That also is not for their own sake. It is mainly to liberate or to help other beings. So there are many, what you call the unique goals, aspirations, and even endeavors. So that's why they are called the great, what is called the Bodhisattva, the great being. Clearly beheld the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom itself, and saw that even the five aggregates are empty of intrinsic. So while Buddha is in meditative state, so Avalokiteshvara, that great Bodhisattva, is also at that time meditating on emptiness. What kind of emptiness? Meditating that all the five aggregates are empty of intrinsic existence. So that's the uncommon context. But before we go further, we need to understand this. When we say sutras, so Buddha's teachings, what does it mean? What are they? Does it has to be spoken directly by Buddha or something else? So here, normally sutra or the Buddha's teaching is words or speech of Buddha, generally. But it doesn't necessarily require that Buddha speaks directly or comes out of Buddha's mouth. So we have three types of sutras we call Do, Ka, Buddha's teaching. So first, words spoken by Buddha himself, that we can understand. So those words or those teachings that Buddha gave directly. So Buddha is saying these words. The words are coming, the teachings are coming out of Buddha himself. So there's one category. And then we have another category, words spoken with the permission of Buddha. Buddha has allowed. So this is the context. Just we have read, thus have I once heard the Bhagavan was staying in Rajgiri. These are also considered sutra because Buddha has allowed. Buddha has instructed to write this context, the background of every teaching. So these are not the words that Buddha has spoken directly or spoken directly, but those are permitted by Buddha. So there is this one category. So the one that we read about the context is that context falls under the words spoken with the permission of Buddha. And then words that originated from Buddha's blessing. Chinjilabeka. So this one is the main body of this teaching falls under this rubric, the words that originated from Buddha's blessing. So Buddha wasn't talking, but Buddha somehow blessed by the power of Buddha's blessing. So they are talking or they are teaching on Buddha's behalf. So in this case, Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara, they had this discussion. But this discussion is not coming, not because of their it did not come about because of their own intention, but somehow it was blessed by Buddha, and they started having this dialogue. So these are the categories, 3 different categories of sutras. So now we have finished the context. So now we are diving into the main body. So main body, if we divide that into subheadings, it will be like this. Shariputra's query into the perfection of wisdom. So Shariputra asks Avalokiteshvara, if anybody who wishes to practice the perfection of wisdom, how do we go about it? So that's the Shariputra's query. And then Avalokiteshvara's response. So Avalokiteshvara responds, so this is the way to engage in the practice of perfection of wisdom. And then finally, Buddha affirms whatever Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara has debated or discussed. Buddha says that that's right, excellent. So this is the actual main body. So let's go into it. So the first one, Shariputra's query. Thereupon, through the Buddha's inspiration, the Venerable Shariputra spoke to the noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, and said, how should any noble son or noble daughter who wishes to engage in the practice of profound perfection of wisdom? So Shariputra, here it says Shariputra. Shariputra is not his real name. Putra, I think in Sanskrit or Hindi, is called son. So his mother's name is Shari. So basically saying that Shari's son, Shariputra. So thereupon, through the Buddha's inspiration, not by himself, but because Buddha blessed him to ask these questions, Shariputra asked these questions. Venerable Shariputra spoke to the noble Avalokiteshvara. So here, the Shariputra spoke to noble Avalokiteshvara. So this is also falls under the remember that there are 3 types of sutra. Words spoken with the permission of Buddha. So this whoever is that, this Ananda is the compiler. So Ananda is saying all this. This is not Buddha's word, or this is not Shariputra's word, or Avalokiteshvara's word. This is the Ananda's word. So at that time, what happened? He was saying. So there is this debate. In Tibetan, we call it Sedang Demba. So here they just translate into Shariputra, the Venerable Shariputra. So they translated it into Venerable, the Venerable Shariputra. So in Tibetan, we say Sedang Demba. So this is more like a prefix, honorific term given to Shariputra. So the argument is that Shariputra is much senior to Ananda. So Ananda won't address Shariputra as venerable or Sedantamba. So Sedantamba is the term that the usage of Sedantamba is used to those who are junior to you. So here when we say Sedantamba or the venerable is one who has actually kind of eradicated or destroyed all the defilements. So in English, it's very simple. It's Venerable Shariputra spoke to Noble Avatokoteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being. So we already talked about this. So how should any noble son or noble daughter? So here we said Rigi Pom, Rigi Pomo. So noble son and noble daughter. So some, like Tibetan version that I am reading, it only has the noble son. How should Sedan Dembash, where is the Tibetan one? It doesn't have this noble son and or noble daughter. It doesn't have. So it's a Sharipu Sedan Demba Sharipu Chanju Semba Semba Chembo Papa Chenese Wanjula Tigeje Meso Rigi Pu Kanla La Sherabji Paru to Chimba. So there's only one. But in other texts there are two. But it looks like it has to follow that, because when he answers, there is this both there. But if you just use one, then it is more of a addressing the Avalokiteshvara rather than addressing those who wishes to practice. So anyway, how should any noble son or noble daughter, Rigipon, Rigipomo, so noble son or noble daughter, first of all, the noble son or noble daughter, if we use that version, so not just noble son, it also says noble daughter. This is to signify that enlightenment or the practice of this perfection of wisdom can be practiced by anybody. There is no discrimination between male and female. Anybody can practice, can train in that path, and can eventually achieve enlightenment. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is Rigipu. Rig means from the Buddhist point, you said that everybody has this Buddha nature. Even just a cockroach, little insect, tiny insect, has the Buddha nature. Even a serial killer has the Buddha nature. But why, let's say serial killer, why he is acting that way is that Buddha nature hasn't ripened. So when it ripens, when it is ready, when it ripens, it is still in the, what do you call, the seed. So when it meets the conducive condition, when it meets the right condition, then it started to sprout. It get ripened. And then, one becomes the vessel, the pure vessel for practicing. So here is those who have, when we say, what is that word now? The great being, how should any nobles and noble daughters? So nobles and noble daughters are those whose Buddha nature is now ripened. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is those who are pure vessels for the teaching of emptiness. Some people are not ready for emptiness teachings, because those who are not ready, when they hear teachings on emptiness, it creates anxiety. There's so much fear that then there's also danger of falling into the two extremes. Then when they say, oh, things are empty, they literally take it as things not existing. So this can also mean that those who are ready for emptiness teaching or ready to practice emptiness. So how should these people who wishes to engage in practice, how should they go about? How should they be trained? So that's Shariputra's question. So that is the question that Shariputra asks. How should noble son and noble daughters go about in training into the perfection of wisdom? So when this had been said, the holy Avalokiteshvara, so now the Avalokiteshvara's presentation on how to practice, how to engage in this practice. So of course this part is again laying the foundation, laying the context. So when this was said, when this had been said, the holy Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, spoke to the venerable Shariputra and said, Shariputra, any noble son or noble daughter who so wishes to engage in the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom should clearly see this way. They should see perfectly that even the five aggregates are empty of intrinsic existence. So first, Avalokiteshvara explains that briefly. He said those who wishes to engage in this practice, they should see everything empty of inherent existence. They should see perfectly that even the five aggregates are empty of intrinsic existence. So it's just a briefly mentioning that. And now the question is, so how do we see all these five aggregates as empty? Then comes the form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form too is not other than emptiness. Likewise, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness are all empty. So when when Avalokiteshvara answers Shariputra's question, so mainly Avalokiteshvara is talking about the emptiness, that is the object. And then there is this subjective, not subject, there's an object and subject. So the mind or the wisdom that is cognizing this emptiness. So when it comes to that, it talks about these stages or parts. So that's why it is divided into presentation of individual trainings. So first, Avalokiteshvara present the how to engage in this perfection of wisdom in an elaborate way, very detailed way. Those are meant for those who are not so intelligent, those who are not so sharp, like people like us, who require elaboration in detail, using lots of analogy and examples. And then at the end, concise presentation in the form of mantras. And this is mainly for those who have high intelligence. We call onbun, those who doesn't require too much elaboration. So there are two parts. So let's look at it. So presentation of individual trainings. So there is this subjective part. So it is divided into the practices of 5 parts. So first, the training in the path of accumulation and path of preparation, and then training in the path of seeing, training in the path of meditation, and then finally how Buddhahood is achieved through relying on the perfection of wisdom. So this is the actual word, but we need to discuss this first. So this comes later. It will talk about the 5 aggregates. So we need to have some understanding of these 5 aggregates. You will hear and see this all the time. When we talk about emptiness, when we talk about impermanence, we talk about 5 aggregates. So what are these? I know you all know, but just in case there are people who are not very clear about this. So basically these 5 aggregates we can kind of roughly divide into 2, physical and mental. So the first one is the physical aggregate of form. So these are visible forms, that what we call or medical matter or physical things, like our body, the things that we see. So it can be 4 elements, 5 sense organs, sense objects. So anything that is physical, that is matter-based. So these are what we call the aggregate of form. And then we have aggregate of feeling, aggregate of perception, aggregate of mental formation. I think in order to explain this, we should go to the next slide. That will make it easier, because aggregate of form, so like if you look at this, later we will come to this 18 elements. So what are the 18 elements? 6 consciousness, 6 sense faculties, 6 sense objects. So this is similar to this. How? So we have, I think first we will just look at the form aggregate of form. Aggregate form, 5 consciousness, 5 sense faculties, 5 sense objects. So this is similar to, if for the first one is the here, look at the how our eyes see things. So you need to have the image. Then you need to have this retina. And then you need to have this primary visual cortex. So first you need the image. When your eye come into contact with whatever form or image you see, then it reflects in your retina. So this image is one of these sense objects, eye sense object. So it's the visible forms. And then the sense faculty is more like the retina. You need to have the medium. So we need to have the sense eye organ or eyes faculty. And then that is not enough. In order to make sense, this retina, all this, it has to send the neural, the message to our brain, primary visual cortex. Without this primary visual cortex, this visual cortex process that whatever information it is receiving, and then it will say, okay, this is, let's say if you're looking at a car, so this is car. So likewise, we need the eye consciousness. So this is similar to the eye consciousness, the ear consciousness. Like if you go to the sense organs, eye faculty, ear faculty, and then also like when it comes to 6 sense objects, visible forms, sound, smell, taste, and tactile. So all phenomena you can classify into this. So then we have these other things which are not form, which needs just mental, the mind itself. So then we have the 6th consciousness, the mental consciousness. So now with that we go back to so when things comes to contact with our eyes, for example, then let's say if you see a car, nice car, So when that object comes in contact with our eyes, what will happen is then you will have some feeling of that. Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And then aggregate or perception helps us to discern it. What is this? Identify, oh, with this shape, that kind of look, this is a car. And then after we have identified what that is, then you have some responses. Or I like this car, or I don't like this car, or this is not a good thing, this is that. So this is what is called the aggregate of mental formation. So aggregate form is the object, and then the organ or the faculty, and then this consciousness. These three come together, and then we have aggregate of feeling, aggregate of perception, aggregate of mental formation. So this is how 5 aggregates work. So then we also need to understand, because we are now going to talk about the 5 parts. So what are the 5 parts? So first is part of accumulation. So we are talking about Mahayana 5 parts. So Mahayana, the part of accumulation, is the first part. So the first part, the part of accumulation, is when you have achieved the part of accumulation when you generated bodhicitta. When you have this spontaneous bodhicitta. So that's when we say that person has achieved the part of accumulation. So you don't need to have insight into emptiness. If you are able to develop bodhicitta mind, then you are already on the path of accumulation. So this is the Mahayana path, yeah? And then, so the goal is to achieve enlightenment. Just generating bodhicitta is not enough. So you need to engage in the wisdom aspects of the path. So that is meditation on emptiness. So when you start to meditate, so you will first achieve shamatha, calm abiding, and then with that you will gradually develop what is called special insight, the vipassana. So when you are able to have that union of calm abiding and special insight, that's when you reach the second path. So now you can see emptiness, but your clarity of emptiness is still blurred, as if you are looking through a veil. So there is still that veil that is blocking the clarity. So because you haven't perceived the emptiness directly, so through repeated meditation, there will come a time where you will see emptiness directly. So where when you go into the meditative states, you don't see anything else except emptiness. Nothing appears to you. So that is when you have that direct direct insight into emptiness. That's when you have achieved the path of seeing. So that's when you become Arya being. And then you need to further meditate on it repeatedly, because your main goal is to achieve enlightenment. So in order to achieve enlightenment, you need to eradicate all these obscurations. So when you started to counter the obscurations to the path of meditation, when you started countering that obscuration, then you have reached the path of meditation. And then finally, you will be able to eliminate all the obscurations. That's when you become Buddhahood. That's when you achieve the path of no more learning, because now you have perfected everything. There's nothing more to learn. So these are the 5 Mahayana paths. I think we are already beyond our time. Let's see what is the next one. Okay. So I think we will stop here. So now we have laid the foundation for the next one, because next one, this is the main, really the essence of a Heart Sutra. So if you get this 4 line, that form is emptiness, emptiness is form, yeah, that 4 line. So that's the main point. So we will talk about it next Sunday. So thank you, and let's say the dedication prayers. Tage jini sakbe gyawa de tenda ndowa kunla kangben dan kebara chizun losan tabai tembe nyingbo ringdo seje sho jambe bagu chedara kemba dan kundu sambu tenyang dejen deda gungi jesu dalob jen gyawa deda tamje rabdo ngo tuzun shekbe gyawa tamje ji owa kangla chodo ngaba dagi gewe zawan digun jan sambu chuji rabdo ngo waragis